Good evening, everyone. It is 6 p.m. We are in the Lois Weber Theater here at Longfellow Middle School, and we are pleased to welcome you to our first public meeting around the upcoming school year budget. My name is Damon Means. I have the privilege and honor of serving the Wauwatosa School District as superintendent. This is Mr. Keith Brightman. He is our CFO. We have members of our cabinet here, Ms. Elizowski, our Chief of Talent, Mr. Luke Pinion, our Chief of Pupil and Family Supports, and Dr. Nicole Marble, our Chief Academic Officer. We're also pleased to have two of our school board members here, Dr. Lynn Worley and Dr. Eric Jessevanger. Thank you for being here. You may be asking yourselves, what is this meeting? Why are we here? The Wauwatosa School District is one of the few districts in the state of Wisconsin that does not have the responsibility or the obligation of conducting something called an annual meeting. In most school districts in the state of Wisconsin, there is something called an annual meeting where the public must come before the school district, and the school district must come before the public to share the budget for the upcoming school year, and the public has the opportunity to weigh in, ask questions, and even vote on that preliminary budget. It's a very democratic, I would call, progressive Wisconsin component of governance. Wauwatosa, however, does not have that obligation. So what we've done in the past here in this district is that we've presented the preliminary budget at the first meeting in June, and then the board votes on that same preliminary budget on the second meeting, during the second meeting in June. And the feedback that we have received is that the public have many questions going into that first meeting in June. They want to inquire and know more about the budget, and that the budgeting process feels a little rushed. What we would share with you is that this is the first step in a very long process that doesn't really conclude, and we'll talk about this slide at the end of the presentation. It doesn't really conclude until the month of October, actually the last Monday in October. But we'll get to that timeline shortly. But tonight we're here to give you an overview of our budget and answer any questions that you may have. So we'll get started. So a couple of fast facts that we'd like to share. If you don't mind going to that next slide. Thank you. That between the 2021 and 2022-23 school year, the school district portion of taxes in the Wauwatosa actually dropped by $405. That's something that we believe that you look at our tax rate, we're very proud of the fact that we have one of the lowest tax rates in the metropolitan area. When you look at where we spend our money, 74% of our overall budget is dedicated towards personnel and supporting personnel. And of that personnel, of that 74%, 87% of them are personnel that work directly in supporting student needs. You should know that with our 2022 financial audit, we had a very clean report. There was no findings that came from that audit, and that we're one of 11 school districts. There's a total of 425 school districts in Wisconsin. There were one of 11 with a AA1, that's it right, Keith? A AA1 rating. That means that our rating as a school system is very strong, that if we had to go out and short-term borrow money, which we don't have to borrow money, but if we had to, then we would get a very good rate based on our Moody's rating. It's really important for us to ground ourselves in our strategic plan, and I won't read this to you, but our community went through a strategic planning process last year. The board adopted that strategic plan this past August. So our mission and our vision is very important to us. It drives everything that we do. It starts with the Board of Education and how they view their work, and they ground their work around our strategic plan. They expect us, when we present things to them, to ensure that whatever proposals, whatever initiatives that we're bringing forward, they align and support in their in service to our strategic plan. We also have core values. I will not read those core values to you as well, but you will see that these core values, again, drive the work that we do every day with students. When we're not living these core values, when this is not the grounding of the work that you see from the school district. We expect you to hold us accountable and tell us that that's not happening in our schools. So there's a total of 6 strategic goals that we work around that is very important and that is driving our work. And you will see that they are academic performance, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, social, emotional, and mental health, high quality staff, culture and community, and operations. These 6 goals drive everything that we do as a school system. When we make this presentation available to you, you will have an opportunity to see our milestones. We've talked about the vision of a graduate here in the Wauwatosa School District for many years now. What we've done with this most recent strategic plan is we've developed district milestones. Those milestones are an opportunity for the public to hold us accountable, once again, to see how are we performing based on those milestones. We believe that if students are reaching those milestones, that they are becoming proficient and prepared for post-secondary life, be it through working through college and going to a 4-year or 2-year college or university, going to the military, or just this afternoon, many of us were in the room honoring and supporting a lot of our students who are going on to apprenticeships and working in the trades. So whatever our students decide to do post-secondary, we believe that these milestones are really critical in ensuring that they're meeting what we want them to meet academically. Thank you. Another thing that's really important for us is that our schools are grounded in their goals and setting goals for their individual schools. So every school has a school growth plan. If you are in a school community, if you have children attending a school, if you have children who have matriculated out of the school and now you're still interested in what that school is doing, I would encourage you to go to your schools or the school that you're interested in, their website, and take a look at their school growth plan. They're 2-year plans. They're plans that they're supposed to truly usher in transformation for the schools. There's 3 areas in which schools are focusing their goals around. The first is improving academic performance. How are we improving the academic standing for each school? The second is disproportionality of student performance. Our school district has been cited by the state of Wisconsin, specifically the Department of Public Instruction, for having disproportionality in a number of different areas, ranging from identifying certain students for special education to over-identifying students for discipline. So the issue of disproportionality is really important to us and that we need to address. The third goal that every school has is, how are you improving your culture and climate? And so I can just give you a real quick snippet. One of the culture and climate goals for this school that we're in this evening, Longfellow, was to ensure that the 8th grade students had some type of memorable experience that they can look back on and say, we are now being promoted to high school, but let's have one last bonding event and an opportunity before we move forward. And just a few weeks ago, they went down to Chicago and they went to the shed and really had a great time and a good day. That experience, that initiative came out of their school growth plan. So once again, I would encourage you to take a look at your schools and look at each school growth plan. Ultimately, the Board of Education has made it very clear to me that they want to see results from our schools. Many of our constituents have called and shared with me that they want to see more and better results from our schools. And so I would just want to ground us as well, and this drives our work with budgeting. Just looking at how we have performed as a school district and individual schools on the school report cards over the last few years. It's important to note, in looking at this slide, that you can see where the school district and certain schools were performing well before COVID. I know since I've arrived, a lot of people will say, but COVID, pre-pandemic, where were we? I think it's really important for us to get our grounding and take a look at how were we performing pre-COVID. Thank you. So this is where I will start, and Mr. Brightman will join in, but when you look at a school district budget, there's 5 major codes or funds that are really important. The first 2 is something called Fund 10 and Fund 27. Fund 10 and Fund 27 are the general operations that go towards supplying the materials and the staff that supports kids in classrooms. Now, Fund 27 specifically addresses students with special needs and how we support those students in particular. Mr. Brightman and I will talk a little bit later in terms of how much the state reimburses us for the services we provide to our students with special needs. But Fund 10 and Fund 27 is the core of our operating budget. So when you hear school district administrators talk about Fund 10 or Fund 27, that's the grounding of that work. The next one is Fund 41. Fund 41 is the line item that we utilize to ensure that we are investing in our facilities. So as a community member, you should always ask the question of the board and of me and of our CFO. So how much money are you putting into Fund 41? We like to always say that a school district that has a healthy Fund 41 account is the school district that will not be in line and not need a facility referendum in the near future because they have deferred maintenance. It's important that you're continuously putting money in Fund 41 and that you're funding it appropriately to make sure that your schools are getting the updates that they need through your overall operating budget. Fund 50. Fund 50 is how we fund and finance school nutrition. It is where we not only pay for materials and equipment that supports our Fund 51, which is our school nutrition program, but it's also the money that we can generate through students purchasing lunches and breakfasts. And then finally, Fund 80 is our community service fund. We're one of the few school districts in the state of Wisconsin that has a recreation department that serves the community through the school district. Most other communities have a recreation department that is connected to their municipality. We're proud of the fact that we serve our community through our rec department, and that rec department is able to provide a lot of different services ranging from elderly and senior citizen programming to obviously the programming that we provide for children year in and year out. That all comes from Fund 80, our community service fund. But we're always very careful to say that it's not the recreation fund, it is the community service fund. So there are many things that we can do in service to the community through Fund 80. Mr. Brightman, I will let you talk about these funds a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing I think I'd add is that all districts in the state use the same account coding structure. And so if you want to compare Wauwatosa to any neighboring district or any of the 425 districts in the state, you can do that easily by looking at the data at the DPI site, and we'll produce some benchmarking data too as we start to look forward with things. Quick budget overview. There was a handout outside the door, and if you didn't get one, I have some up front here too. It's the more complicated version of what you see in the slide ahead of you. The front page that you see is the legally required published version and approval version of the school board. So I'll walk the board through this at the next meeting on Monday, the 12th to 13th, coming up the 12th in more detail. But this is what we'll ask the board to actually approve, is this front page here. Everything you see behind that in the packet is supplementary information. It's not required, but it gives better information, I think, than this single page on the front. So the first page I'll highlight in here is the tax levy impact, right? So that matters to everyone who pays property taxes in the system. And so we're showing a downward trend, as you'll see on the chart and in the numbers with the property tax impact. And a big variable of that is the increased property valuation in the school district and the city, same boundary lines. So that's a shared benefit of living in Wauwatosa. So that's about all I'll go through in this packet. And we'll reference really the slide deck for the rest of this. The board will get, unfortunately or fortunately, a little more information at the board meeting from the packet. Is look at our general fund, Fund 10 for our operations. That's the largest fund that we operate. That drives everything, as Dr. Means said, from our teachers, Leicester Special Education, but all of our regular education teachers, our facility maintenance, utilities, student transportation, athletics, all those things factor into Fund 10. And you'll see we're showing an 8.2% increase to that fund, which is significant. And we'll go through some of our key budget assumptions that help drive that. But really we focused on improving our staffing and front-end student-facing staffing in schools. So we've added people and we've addressed compensation gaps in our system. And so those two things have really driven that 8.2% increase for the general fund. Likewise, in Fund 27, about a $16.8 million fund for next year, a large increase from last year to next year of 18.6%. Again, that's student-facing work that's happening with students with disabilities in our system. And so it's right-sizing the staffing, it's addressing those student needs as are prescribed by the IEPs of those students. Fund 39 is our debt services. You'll see that one has a big amount, a zero amount, and then another large $20 million amount. That's part of our creative debt structure that we have in the system. And the benefit of doing this is on property taxpayers, because the way that this works is we hit it with an expense one year, no expense the next year, resets how we factor into the state aid formula and benefits the amount of aid we get, reducing the property taxes that everyone pays. So it's a way to almost work within the tax code, federal tax code, if you find a way to do that. It's similar with what we're doing with this debt structure. So every other year, you'll see that $0 amount for debt service. We had the board approve a defeasance, they call it, which is putting dollars into escrow, so effectively doubling up those payments. And that happened at the last board meeting. So that's how we navigate through all that. Fund 41, Dr. Deans mentioned that one, and this is where we fund the maintenance of our schools and facilities for the most part within the system. There's some money in our general fund also for that, but most of it comes out of Fund 41. You'll see that we're kind of going against that need to address funding increases to that fund because we're a little concerned about the funding levels from the state. So we've taken our levy away from Fund 41 and added that to Fund 10. They both fit together within the revenue caps as they're addressed. So we're not doing anything unusual. It's just something that we're reprioritizing to Fund 10, given where we think resources might come in. Fund 49 is the referendum spend down. So debt service is Fund 39. That's spending down the debt that we issued to pay for the referendum. The project work comes out of Fund 49. So we're spending that down. We're almost fully spent down. We will be by the end of this next fiscal year. Fund 50 is the food service school nutrition fund. You'll see that that one had a large increase 2 years ago. All school lunches are provided free of charge by the federal government as part of the COVID relief packages at a higher dollar threshold. So all districts virtually banked some dollars during the COVID years, and now we have to spend some of that money down. So you'll see about a $600,000 increase to school nutrition. That's on the expense side. The revenues aren't going up $600,000. That is spending down some of the fund balance in our Fund 50 to pay for about half of that will go to a freezer replacement at Whitman Middle School. That's one of those built into the building type freezer structures that has to be replaced. It's original to the structure. And then Fund 80 is Community Service Fund. That funds primarily our department, but other community service things that we have in play. Other options we can look at with that is a daycare structure. You can look at senior meal programs, all those kind of things. Other districts also fit in their Fund 80 within that structure. So that's how it all plays out. Again, each one of those funds is laid out in a little bit more detail on this handout and broken out by how we spend the money within each one of those funds in the budget recommendation. And then people, right? We're a people business service minded. And so most of our costs, 74% of our budget comes from the people side of things. If you look at where we spend those dollars, you can see teachers is just under 64% at the bottom of the slide. Educational assistants, 5.2. Some of the clerical administrative support, buildings and grounds are also in schools with students. But if you look at the district support, it's things that are Fisher and things that are done to help teachers do better in the classroom, do the coaching, that kind of thing. It's about 10% of our budget that we have there. And then a very small rounding here of others that just didn't fit, student workers, that kind of thing that would fit into the other category. But a nice breakdown of how we distribute our personnel. Again, 87% of the dollars we spend are spent on staff in schools to help support student learning with that.
Sure, I can talk to you. When we make this presentation available online, you can use these hyperlinks to go directly to our staffing plan. We're really proud of the work that Ms. Elizowski and our principals did this past spring in detailing where are we spending the money. So when you go to that first slide and we talk about the fact that 74% of our operating budget goes toward staff, you should know where that staffing is going. What we're very proud of is that we have low class sizes in this school system. I think you saw in the year in glance in regards to Fund 27, we've added more special education teachers. And so the student to teacher ratio or the caseload for students with special needs in the district have been reduced going into next year as well. So we're proud of the fact that the term that we use is we're ensuring that the front facing staff that works with children is truly commensurate with what the needs are in the district.
Yeah, these address our desire to be much more transparent, or as transparent as we can be. And these staffing plans are all that. We say who's in what school, how much we're spending in each school, what the staffing levels are in each school. And so I think this is a great step forward in addressing that. We've also aligned our budget structure to our staffing plans. So we're talking real-time data between the Human Resources Division and my division. And it's another thing we're striving for is just kind of breaking down those silos that most districts see between different areas of the district and really communicating and working from the same page with each other with that. So state aid versus property taxes. And the two largest pieces of that pie that you see on the screen are property taxes at 55% of our revenue budget and state aid at 28%. And that's all state aid combined. That's everything from a small amount of transportation aid that we get to the per pupil categorical aids, to the state equalization aid, all that in the pool together. Within the 13% of our revenues come from open enrollment students coming into the system. So that's a significant amount for us, just about 13%. And then we have kind of the rounding categories, which would be student fees, facility rental fees, athletic aid entrance fees, that kind of thing that come into the system with that. But it's a pretty simple breakdown. Again, by doing the debt structure we did, we hope to minimize the property tax reductions that happen through that current formula structure. Keep the taxes as low as we can within the system.
We felt that this was an important slide so you know where the money comes from, and that the vast majority, 55% of the funds that come in, that funds our overall operating budget comes from local property taxes.
Yeah, you hear 2/3 funding at the state level. Their goal is to have across the state, on average, the state aid portion be 2/3 of that pie. And of course, Wauwatosa is more property wealthy than most districts in the state, so you get less state aid, meaning more property taxes. And then it's spread across the tax base to equalize that impact.
So while we're really proud of the state of our budget, we think we're strong. We talked about our audit. You see where the money's coming from. When you talk to our staff, when you talk to our academic leaders, they will tell you where are the blind spots? Where do we need to make additional investments? And what you see here are I would consider to be areas where our leaders have said, this is where we're deficient. These are areas where we're not competitive with other school districts in the metropolitan area in regards to the experience that we're able to offer to children. And I won't read all of these to you, but what you will see is that what we've done over the last year is what we have tried to plug the holes. And we've tried to make sure that these deficits that we were hearing from our staff members that we weren't doing well, that we needed to fill them. We're really proud of all of these different things, ranging from the increased planning time that we've offered to all of our elementary school staff to the much heralded and publicized 12% increase in compensation for our educators. These are gaps that when we arrived, people shared with us, these are areas that we need to improve to continue to be competitive. And I'm really proud of the fact that we have filled those holes.
Yeah, so the big one on the page is on the left column, the 12% increase in teacher compensation was also just approved by the board. And the rationale for that is coming into the system, we did some benchmarking, looked at other districts in Southeast Wisconsin, and Wauwatosa benchmarked third lowest of all districts on average teacher comp. And so that didn't sit well with us. It doesn't fit what we think the vision for the district is. And so we prioritized that and really made that happen. We'll show the budget impact of doing that. And there's a little bit of risk involved, but we talk through that, and we'll continue to talk through that as we look forward. But that was a key metric for us, and we believe this is going to get us at least to be kind of near the median. We'll see what other districts also do within the same budget cycle, but that was a priority, and we made it happen.
While we're proud of the gaps that we've filled, there are still areas where our staff would say there's still work to be done. And so again, I won't read all of these to you, but I think what is really interesting to us is that we have a need for increasing social workers. Again, I want to acknowledge our city leaders who are in the room this evening. They have been very cooperative with us in offering social work help from the city of Wauwatosa. But even with that support with our partners at the city, there's a need for more social workers in our district. We also understand that we have needs for educational assistance with our youngest students in the district. Our junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten students, they need more support in classrooms. The more we can make that first learning experience a positive one, the better. We believe that having full-time educational assistance in those areas will be very helpful. And then the other thing, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but when you compare our school district to like-sized school districts that we want to really be competing against from an academic standpoint, where we're investing our funds and how much we're investing around instructional materials is really low, and that we have to increase what we're doing from that perspective. Mr. Brighton? Thank you. And so there are other areas. The ongoing facility needs is another area. While we are really proud of what we've been able to do for our educators in the organization, we know that there's still work to be done on the teacher compensation and employee compensation side. And then finally, we talk so much about being in a 21st century learning environment, but we have not made the pivot from what we're currently using with technology to where we need to be and transition to with technology. So what you'll see under the orange bar are areas where we believe we need to enhance and grow from an instructional technology standpoint.
Yeah, and then the ongoing facility needs, you can see that the increasing fund to Fund 41, and we're taking a little bit away from it right now, but we do want to restore that and put that back. We think that's important. There are ideas out there like a community and a district field house that would be both community-based as well as district-based for our needs also. Restoring and updating cafeterias and common spaces in our 2 middle schools. As you walk around the school, it's very traditional. It's built as it was intended, but nothing has been really updated from a facility standpoint at the 2 middle schools since they were constructed. And then some additional operation and relief workers. So having additional district staff that are out doing the grounds work and facility maintenance work of the various schools. And so increasing that are some examples that we have there. On the teacher and employee compensation, we're left with some salary structure questions from teachers, and it's called the year of service variance. So where they're placed on the salary schedule compared to where they would see themselves being placed doesn't always line up. And so there's a concern there that we look into that. Increasing compensation for our EAs, education assistants in the system. We do benchmark that one also, and that just is a job that historically is paid less in the system and with districts, but there's a need to look at that compensation in the current labor market and the needs of those positions as they're currently evolving. And then possibly a discounted daycare for staff and or the community through that child care or through a community service type approach that can be beneficial. So ideas on the table that will continue to be processed and aren't part of this next budget, but part of the idea for future planning.
We wanted to share these 2 slides with you to share that building a budget is about building a vision and recognizing where we want to take a school district into the future. And so these items are things that we continue to hear people discuss and talk about and have excitement around. We know that these are areas where our children need us to continue to wrestle with and find ways to finance. Again, we're proud of the things that we were able to do this year with this budget, and there were quite a few items that we were able to address, but there's still more work to be done. We're not going to rest on our laurels or rest on the fact that we have accomplished so much in such a small amount of time. You want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. So mentioned the word budget blind spots, and so some areas where we think we are not adequately currently funding what we think we need to do as a system. The first one is the area of curricular materials, and that's updating curriculum, that's having the rollout, buying the supplies, the equipment, the textbooks, the online platforms, whatever the student and the curriculum is driven with. It's professional development to make sure that teachers are trained properly in using that curriculum. And we have a $1.374 million budget for that now, which includes not just curriculum adoptions, but really all professional development in the system, as well as some just replacements of classroom sets and that kind of thing. And so we see that as another $2 million annual need to really keep pace with the changing curriculum needs that the system has. And that's putting it through, I think, a 5-year cycle, 7-year cycle, 7-year cycle with that. So it'll be recurring. So every 7 years, we come back to that same platform and keep on pace with that. Student transportation coming into the district. This is the only larger district that I'm aware of that doesn't offer regular student busing and transportation and never has. There's a city of the first class exemption, and so there isn't that requirement. But in looking at just the main corridors, North Avenue, Mayfair Road, all of them, Watertown Plank, all of them, as they wrap through the city and the district, we see a need for safe student transportation to be part of our system. And so that would mean adding busing to a system that has never had it. So that means additional costs. We anticipate that would be about $2.3 million. And we got to that number by looking at how we benchmark with student transportation on a per student basis. Very low, because we just offer really athletic transportation right now in that range. And then looking at what our neighbors, Berlin, Elmbrook, Romney Falls, and a few other districts do, taking an average of that per student times our number of students to get us up to a $2.3 million number. So that's about what it would be. We can look at transportation options, maybe neighborhood stops, maybe using the main arteries. We'll look at that, but to be average in our costs, that's where we got that $2.3 million amount. Data culture analysis. This is giving us the data we need to make better budgetary and instructional decisions in the system and investing dollars in the platforms and the people to help us make that happen. And then right sizing our technology staffing. Obviously, technology is more in play than it has ever been before. And so looking at increasing both the compensation for existing techs within our system, as well as adding additional people supports to that system where we see that it's needed. So about $125,000 with that mix. So you can see all in, we have a list on the prior slides, and now we have 4.7 million of additional needs if we were to fund things as they were here. We'll show another slide coming up where we're showing the budget deficit for next year about the same magnitude. So you can start to see an effect of what we think the district is headed with resources and adequate state funding. And we'll get to that too, what the adequate state funding looks like and may not look like within our system.
I would just add, Mr. Brightman did a great job with this slide. I would just add that the research shows that the student experience is enriched when you have high quality instructional materials. And what Dr. Marble and her team is finding as our chief academic officer is that we have not updated many of our curricular areas in many years. Mr. Brightman referenced that we have a 7-year curriculum revision cycle. Some of our curricular areas have not been revised in 7 years. And so the materials that your children, our children in this community are using are dated in many areas. That's why that line item is there. And again, I think as a community, we're very proud of having many of our elementary schools and middle schools nestled in our neighborhoods and our communities, but we're becoming a more spread out city and getting through some of the major thoroughfares of this community. Mainly if you are a parent who dropped children off at Whitman Middle School or Wauwatosa West High School on Center Street, you know the challenge of getting our children to school. What we're seeing from a general school operation perspective is that the attendance rate for our children who are attending school, specifically at Wauwatosa West, that first hour attendance rate is really high when you look at absences or tardies. And when you talk to the children and families and ask why, a lot of it is due to the bottleneck and the traffic challenge that they're dealing with. And so we know that we're continuing to hear families share with us that they have transportation needs. And as Mr. Brightman identified, it's a service that we don't provide. And it's actually making other components of our transportation more challenging. I know I've received a lot of calls from families who will say, why is reserving a bus for athletics or for dance so much difficult? Why is it so difficult? Well, it's difficult because the transportation companies will say, we're only investing in you by $255,000. There are other school districts in the metropolitan area where they have a larger commitment from those school systems, and so they can make their buses more available quicker for those families. Finally, over our tenure in the district so far, there's been a lot of requests and a higher use of data and technology in the district. And so that's why those 2 line items are placed there, because we're seeing that there's a greater need for those 2 areas.
Okay, back to just a couple graphics to show kind of the fiscal responsibility side. And the one on the right side shows the 425 districts in the state, their distribution and their bond rating. And obviously Wauwatosa is part of the left, which is a good thing. That's the second highest rating you can get. So we're one of 11 that has that AA1 or AAA rating for a school district across the state. So we're proud of that. We want to make sure we continue to be in that mark. The second one is, and it's important to note that our audits have come out with clean audit opinions. There's some kind of what I call miscellaneous finding with staffing levels, that kind of thing that you'll see. And I think every district audit that you look at, not just in our state, but across the country, is we don't staff up our operations sides like many other private sector entities do, because they're required to by whatever federal regulations they may work under. So we do the best we can with the staffing levels that we do have. But we are proud of having a clean audit opinion, and we'll do our best to make sure we sustain that for the system.
So this is an opportunity, and this is the teacher in me probably coming out. I want to pause and just recap where we are so far. What we've shared with you is that 74% of our operating budget goes towards people. And that of that 74%, 87% of those individuals are front-facing personnel that's working directly with kids in schools. So 74% of our operating budget is going towards people, and is mainly going toward ensuring that we have low class sizes and we have common planning time for teachers. That remaining 26% becomes a very small percentage of the pie that's remaining in the school system. And it's also important to note that we continue to receive clean audits. That means external auditors coming in and saying, your books are clean, you're running a good business. The auditors are also saying, and that the financial world is also saying, that out of all of the school districts, out of the 425 school districts in Wisconsin, you're one of 11 that have such a high rating that we are giving you a AA1 rating. So what we're sharing with you is that we believe that we're investing the funds in the right place, that there are, the funds are going towards children, but there's challenges among us and before us. And I want to take this opportunity before I turn it back over to Mr. Brightman to thank State Representative Robert Vining for being here as well to hear our budget presentation. Mr. Brightman, because I think she'll be very interested in this portion of the presentation.
Yeah, so we did host legislators a couple months ago. We've also talked to the PTO leadership. We had a DPI presentation that we participated in also. So some of you have seen some of this information before, but we think it's critically important to continue to reinforce this, that the way schools are funded in the state of Wisconsin is through our state's biennial budget process. And there is a constitutional requirement in our state that the state adequately fund public education. So that's a gray word. You can define that, and you can kind of shift how that is defined. But that is a requirement of our state constitution. It was upheld by our Supreme Court 25, 30 years ago with that. So that's a requirement of the state budget process. State government then produces a budget. It starts with the governor, who assembles the state agencies, their requests, provides that to the legislature. The legislature then takes that budget and gives it over to a select few of the legislature from the Joint Committee of Finance. And they really process through all the various workings of the state budget. And that's everything from higher ed to the transportation budget, to the correction system, to K-12 schools. Really everything you can think of within the state gets processed through the Joint Finance Committee. And so they have a heavy lift with everything. And so we've tried to produce a request from them that is straightforward, simple, and really gets to the point of what we think is needed to define that adequate funding request that we have. The Joint Committee on Finance is meeting right now. They posted this week for discussions that will happen next week on the higher ed and the tech college funding. So we expect that K-12 funding will come probably the week following that in the queue of what they do. We kind of expected it to happen before Memorial Day. It didn't get there, but we'll see it over the next couple of weeks. And then the bottom of the pyramid is the local school board. So the local board really has very little to drive where resources come from the system. That is a state responsibility, and it's a state part of the state biennial budget process. Local school board can increase student fees. They can increase those small line items within the budget approval that they have, but they can't increase the property tax levy. They can't increase the state aid pools. They can go to an operating referendum or a facility referendum to increase resources for the district, as you're aware, but the board themselves cannot authorize additional resources beyond what that revenue limit, what the prescribed funds are through the state budget process.
While the school board is an agent of the state government, the school board has this is humbling to hear. The school board as a governing body has very limited opportunity to generate more revenue. The responsibility for funding public education in the state of Wisconsin rests with the state legislature and the state government, including the governor. When you have the current structure that we have right now, that power can ping pong between the governor's mansion and the state legislature. That's why we're all waiting anxiously to see what the final result will be and recommendation will be from the Joint Finance Committee regarding what school funding will look like. I think one of the reasons why it's been delayed, and the mayor could probably speak to this better than I can, but there's been quite a debate around shared revenue in our state right now and how much money should be invested in state revenue, or sorry, shared revenue, excuse me, for municipalities. And so I think they're still trying to figure that out and land on a process there. Mr. Brightman is correct. Traditionally, the Joint Finance Committee has typically released their K-12 education budget around Memorial Day. So this is getting late. Technically, we should have a new budget by June 30th. It does not look optimistic right now that will happen. We'll still hold out hope. It's only May 31st right now.
You've heard probably a lot of news about shared revenues with municipalities, and our revenue limit works very similar to that. It's just a prescribed limit through the state budget process on the resources that we can increase from one year to the next. So it's very similar, and its theory behind it works differently, but similar in theory.
What's challenging and humbling for a school board is that the power that they do have is that they can find ways to reduce the budget, but they have very limited opportunity to raise revenue. And as Mr. Brightman referenced, even if a school board votes to go to an either operating referendum or facility referendum, the public still decides what's going to happen, not the school board. So it is very rare that the 7 members of the school board can decide where there will be more money. What they can do is reduce the budget, but they can't increase it. It's a humbling statement, but I think it's also important for the public to know the way that our state government has structured the role of the school board.
And so in a couple slides, you'll see what our legislative platform was as a district. The board approved that act earlier this year. And our rationale for the request that we had is, number one, was it fundable? Like, does the state have the resources to fund what we're requesting, or are we kind of pie in the sky or asking for something that really can't happen? The bottom line is the state has the resources right now. The state currently has a $6.9 billion operating surplus, and that's taking their revenues over their current cost structures within that. And so you can see, based on just several years of building up a surplus and having a surplus budget position, the state's also built up a $7 billion fund balance or reserve fund. And so they have both that $7 billion set aside in reserves, and they have about a $7 billion operating surplus. So 2 separate pockets of money. Back around the turn of the year, Speaker Voss was speaking about this, and they estimated that the state would have about a $7 to $8 billion operating surplus at this point in time. When they got these estimates out, it ended up being $6.9 billion. So even within a $6 billion structure, the money was there to invest in education the way that we had asked the board to approve the platform, and they did.
So as we tell our story, you will note that we talked about some of the areas that we still believe we have blind spots around. Every school system in this state could give the same presentation. And so we're optimistic that our state leaders will hear the needs of our children and our educators and help us with funding in a more proactive, positive way.
Okay, and so to narrow and be straightforward again, and again, we're in tune that legislators and the Joint Finance Committee, the governor, all the people that are working on providing a state budget have a lot of mechanics and technical things they have to look through, a lot of things to understand. So we really want to drive to what are the key performance indicators, in our opinion, of an effective state budget for public education. So the first one is give us a revenue authority increase that's aligned to the overall economy. That is how school funding worked in our state from 1993 all the way through 2009. There's a deviation from that, but really go back to that as being the way that schools are funded. That keeps it sustainable, affordable within the state economy as a whole. So asking for that, and that's the slide at the bottom left. I'll go through that one in a little more detail in a minute. The second one is funding for special education reimbursements and Medicaid reimbursements. So special education are 127 costs. The vast majority of those are considered aidable. So it's people supporting the learning needs of students. And we get right now about 30% of a rebate or reimbursement the next year on those costs. Most states are closer to that 60 to 90% threshold. So we're asking the state to move towards a 60% or doubling of what they provide for that reimbursement in the current state biennial budget. The Medicaid piece, we have medically fragile students where our staff supports feeding tubes and other medical needs of our students. We then get Medicaid reimbursements on those, and it's more significant dollars than you would think it is. It's close to $1 million of reimbursements. And right now the state keeps 40% of that reimbursement, and we get 60% of the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar for that. We're asking for that to go to 100% because it's our cost supporting those needs. So why shouldn't we get the full reimbursement of that is our argument with that one. And then funding for student mental health supports. We're all aware. The chart in the lower right shows what is youth risk behavior data that comes from the state. It's done every 2 years or so. And you can see an upward trend prior to COVID, where you had a spike up in 2021's data. But that was even including data and assessment done just before COVID hit. So we're expecting that number to increase even more exponentially. So there's true needs within our system. We're seeing that daily basis within our system, within our staff, within the community. I think we're all recognizing that that's a need, and we need additional resources, of course, to help fund that support.
I just read an article today around teachers who are leaving the profession, and mainly one of the factors is that they being teachers are being asked to serve in many different roles: social worker, counselor, a lot of different support areas. What we're suggesting with these legislative priorities is that the state, who's responsible for funding public education in Wisconsin, needs to help us. So when we hear about young people who are having challenging times in our schools, we recognize it, and we would love to support them in a different way as well, with social workers and different experts that can allow teachers to teach. We want that to happen as well. That's unable to happen right now because we're not receiving appropriate funding to make those things happen. We've talked about our 12% compensation increase. That comes due to the fact that we have such a strong financial standing, and we were able to do it on our own. But that was not due to the help of the state of Wisconsin. That was due to the very prudent financial oversight of the board over years that created a cash position that allowed us to distribute the funds the way that we were this time around. But providing a consumer price index increase ongoing will be, I believe, critical to this school district continuing to retain high quality staff.
Okay, and I really like this slide. So I don't think it matters what your political leaning is or kind of what your stance is on funding schools or restricting funding. At some point you have to look at this chart and kind of in your own head draw your line of where you see schools as adequately funded or not. And so the dark blue bars are where we did have alignment with CPI, the consumer price index, driving additional resources from one year to the next. And so that started in 1993. That was the case all the way up until 2009. You recall there was national recession at that point, a state recession as well, and all state agencies were reduced in their state funding. And so you can see a deviation from where CPI was. That's where the light blue bars don't line up with the dark blue bars in the chart. But then you see the big drop in funding. That's Act 10, as that happened in 2011. And from that point on, there never has been a replacement of that CPI-based funding. And so whether you like Act 10 or not, you see it as a reset or not, your opinions on that, there never was kind of that commitment to go back to having that adequate funding beyond the Act 10 standpoint. And the last two bars on there are the current state biennial budget. There were $0 put towards school revenue authority in the last state biennial budget. What there was done, and you'll hear this headline both from the governor and the legislature, is that they put more money into public education than they ever did before, and that is true. They put it all under the equalization aid only, no revenue authority, just equalization aid, which reduced tax levies across the state. So all it did was shift the nut, so to speak, of how schools are funded, whether it's taxes or state aid. It didn't provide $1 of additional spendable authority to school districts. So with that chart, in your own head, you can kind of define where adequate funding was deviated from, I think, within that. So our legislative priorities, we tried to keep it straightforward, keep it in the context of kind of an It's Elementary type of school campaign. So we have the 1+2+3. And so I'll show you what those mean. The first one is, number one is reminding the Joint Committee of Finance that 2 years ago, and many of those same members are part of the committee that were on it 2 years ago, they saw the lack of state funding for the current biennial budget as a problem. And it was going to create what we call that fiscal cliff that you've probably read about for school funding. And so they did placehold $350 million to put into the current state biennial budget, not have it available the last 2 years, but put it in now to really offset the lack of funding for the prior 2 years. So they're starting with such a dramatic base. So we remind them that that was a need back then. They should approve that as part of the need as they approve a state biennial budget for the next 2 years. As we look at the current budget, we have a little more slide here. So there is one more slide that we'll have within our legislative platform documents that shows a one-pager that has the 1+2+3. The first one is CPI-based funding. The second one is special education and Medicaid funding. And then the third one is aligned to some other revenue sources we have. But we hope that this really translates with our legislators, that they can understand what we're asking for. We're not over-asking. And again, we're not asking for something that's not affordable with the state budget surpluses that they have within that. So shifting gears a little bit now, and Dr. Beans mentioned this a little bit, is the investment we're making in the system. And so we have a very healthy financial fund balance as a system. You can see we ended the last fiscal year a year ago with a 51% fund balance in the district. And so that is high when you compare it to other districts across the state. A best-in-class benchmark is to be about 25%. So that's about 3 months of working capital if you equate it to a fiscal year cycle with that. So the 51% would be 6 months of working capital that we have within our system. But that provides some flexibility for us to look at this as a rainy day fund. And if there was ever a rainy day, you're coming off of post-COVID, you're looking at disappearing federal revenues, $0 on a state funding standpoint, unsure state revenues, we're leveraging our fund balance and our cash position based on that need.
And the way that most school districts work, that when they reach the moment of December and January, they have to go to a lender and short-term borrow until the taxes come in and are paid the next year. That's not the case here in Walton Tulsa. So when we're at our lowest point of using our fund balance, we call that the cash position. That means that's actual money on hand. And you will see in the second graph there that at our lowest cash position point, right now we would have $21 million, or that represents 25% of our operating budget. That is highly unusual for school districts. Most school districts will have to go out and bridge and borrow money and bridge themselves until property taxes are paid. That's the strength and the power of where we currently stand with our financial position here in the Wauwatosa School District.
And I like the cash position chart. That gives a much clearer picture of where the resources really are at a given point in time during the year. We give the board a monthly financial report that shows our cash position, and it's just simply tracking that on a chart format. But I think it paints that clear picture of where we are and what we have is capacity to be able to fund some things like we've just done, and we'll be showing. So this slide is a simplified version of what we do in a budget projection. So right now, the state has not approved a budget. We don't know what the parameters are going to be. We're making some educated estimates based on what we're hearing from legislators, hearing from colleagues, kind of reading the tea leaves as much as we can. But we have to start building a budget now because we have statutory requirements to issue teacher contracts in May. But yet we don't have a state budget to provide the funding for those teacher contracts. So it's very, Wisconsin's kind of a counterintuitive state with regard to the timing of things. So we have two columns, and you've probably seen this before if you've been keying into board meetings or the other things I talked about. So scenarios that we look at. The one on the left, scenario one, is where we modeled how are we funded and what do our resources look like if we're funded at what the board approved legislative platform was or is. And so based on that, the yellow boxes in the top there, we have $750 in year one for per student funding. If you break that down, that's that $400 that Joint Finance approved 2 years ago but didn't get into the state budget, plus $350 for the first year of the next biennial budget, plus $650 in year two, and then $24 and $45 on another per pupil categorical aid structure, a doubling from that 30% to 60% in special education aid as part of that. There's some mental health supports that were creatively done as part of the governor's budget recommendation. It was $100,000 per district, plus $100 per student, and so it's about $117. We do the math within our student population, and then increasing those Medicaid reimbursements from 60% to 100%. So if you take those revenue streams and those increases and you model that through with a 4% increase on staffing costs year one and 3% year two, you get kind of a bottom line starting position of where we would be within the system within that. And so same backdrop for scenario two, this is what we're hearing may come out of joint finance. They may not recognize that $400 that they had 2 years ago within the funding mechanism. They may or may not provide some per pupil categorically, that second line. There sounds like there probably is some interest in possibly doubling that special education aid reimbursement, or at least getting somewhere close to that in the state biennial budget. I have not heard anything from legislators yet on the Medicaid piece, so we didn't increase that one within our financial framework. So our numbers, you can see at the bottom line of this slide, is a little bit lower. We don't have the surplus that we have in the legislative platform, but there's a reason we asked for what we did in the platform, and that's on the next slide. So then we look at the operating side and the cost structures that we have. And coming into the system, we recognize some ability to be a little bit more efficient in the way that we're getting some revenues based on some things that we can do. There's a one-time revenue source that came in this year. We can use those funds next year, so they are kind of an in and out within the position. That's that top line. We then have some Medicaid reimbursements. This is separate from the reimbursements from the governor, but it's the way the schools are funded. And I apologize, this is a little bit small for the slide. We'll have the handouts online, as I mentioned, and part of the budget discussion 2 Mondays from now. And some other efficiencies that we saw within the system, some contingencies that we could release and make part of our funding streams. We then have expenditure impacts for this year. We've done a lot to address compensation within our system, and we didn't do that because we felt like being nice. We did that because there's a need to do this. We've all seen the labor markets. We've all understand what's happening in private sector, public sector, just finding people to work for the pay that we have and keeping things in place. We've also added some additional supports to the system. We've added some things like the high school lacrosse program is a kind of a miscellaneous piece on there. We're the last district that I can find that doesn't already have a lacrosse program as part of our system. Within that,
I would just point out two things. One, the board this past January made, they accepted our recommendation to reduce the number of open enrollment students that we take into the district. And so you will see that there is a reduction in the number of seats not being offered, and that has a financial impact. If you remember that chart that we showed you a few slides ago, it's about $11 million of revenue that's generated through open enrollment. When you reduce the number of open enrollment students who come into the district, there is a financial implication to it. You will also notice in this line item, and again, we recognize that it's small, and we'll make sure that this is posted first thing tomorrow morning. But we know that keeping teachers satisfied and happy with their work environment is just not compensation. So we invested over $700,000 in creating common planning time for our elementary school teachers. What that means is that if you are part of a third grade teaching team at an elementary school, you need to have time to sit down with your teaching partners to plan what you're going to present instructionally for that group of students. Right now, those 3 teachers or those 4 teachers rarely, if ever, have the ability to sit down as a team and commonly plan. The interesting thing is our middle school and high school teachers do have that common planning time. So we wanted to create that for our elementary school teachers. The feedback that we were receiving prior to making this investment was that was something that was really important to our teachers.
Okay, and so you'll see that the columns are identical in scenario 1 and scenario 2, other than how we're resourced by the state budget as it gets worked through in Madison. And so if you look at scenario 1, the bottom line is effectively we're balanced. We're a little bit short of balanced in that scenario, but effectively balanced over the 2-year cycle. And that's why we asked for what we did with the legislative platform that we had. We saw those needs in the system and we wanted to make sure that they were funded adequately, again, to use that word. Scenario 2, if we're funded at something less than that, and a little side note on joint finance is it's 16 legislators out of the several hundred that are represented in Madison. And so they're really the deciders in how not just schools, but really the state budget is funded in the mix. And so we're estimating what we think they might be discussing. They discuss all this behind closed doors. It's not public until they make it public, and we won't know until they do that. But based on what we hear indirectly, we modeled that, and that shows a $4.4 million deficit year 1 and a $2.8 million or $7 million deficit in year 2. It's a little bit bigger picture in year 2 because we had that $650 per student funding in our assumptions on the prior sheet. So this kind of wraps in looking here at the revenue structures that we see. Differences there drive the bottom line, and that's why you see the difference with the structures at the bottom.
I would just point your attention to the 2 shaded areas again. The light blue shaded area towards the bottom is the investment in compensation for our teachers, and that's the 12% increase. You will see the orange shaded area is for the ESSER, is labeled as ESSER funded positions. We realize that we have ESSER funded positions. The federal government provided ESSER funds to school districts. Those funds will expire at the end of next school year. We utilize our funds to hire more social workers and social emotional health workers. We recognize the need to keep those employees, or at least a portion of those employees, on in the district. And so we know that we will have to make some tough decisions and identify, of all those positions that we funded, how many of them can we afford and keep at the rate of $850,000.
Okay, and so assuming we are funded at what we think joint finance and the state budget process might come as an endpoint, we then will leverage or utilize some of that cash position that we mentioned earlier. And so that's not something you can do permanently. That will be a solution in place for a year or 2 to give us time to address either through a new state budget coming up in 2 years, or additional funding streams, or having discussions with the board and community about resourcing internally with what we want to do with that. But we're comfortable with the cash position. Again, we've built that up over time, and it's a rainy day if it ever was one. And so we're recommending that the budget spend down some of that over the next 2-year cycle if we're not funded by the state in the way that we should be, that we feel that we should be based on our platform. All right, so the call to action. Here's the slide I was missing earlier. So it's the 1 + 2 + 3. We're asking for our community and the supporters of not just our district, but really statewide, to do a similar request. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. We're asking them to recognize that $400 from 2 years ago. We're asking them to restore CPI-based funding to our revenue authority looking forward. And then we're asking them to address the special needs reimbursements that we get, the Medicaid reimbursements, the mental health supports for students. It's those three areas that we're asking them to consider and fund within this next state biennial budget. And again, I go back to that chart with the blue bars and the mismatch of the CPI-based funding, the way it used to be, the way that it was structured. And we just ask them to return to that type of funding structure. And again, that just keeps things sustainable and fundable within our system. We do have resources out on, I'll go back one, a resource library, that little QR code at the bottom there. You can go out and get access to some additional resources for additional context and information regarding revenue authority for districts, how state aid works, all sorts of stuff if you want to go out and research that kind of thing. We don't have the money to slide too much with that, with additional information with that. We do have lots of resources out there for you to access as community members and legislators. And then next steps. So we follow a budget calendar, and very similar again to many districts in the state. But we're adding a few items that are local to what we're putting in the mix. The first one is tonight, having a budget hearing and giving the community an opportunity to hear this firsthand. There'll be another opportunity, of course, the board meeting coming up in a week and a half in that context, and then also on June 26th. But that doesn't end the budget cycle. We then go through the month of October where we actually set the original budget. So right now we're setting preliminary budgets because we don't know the state resources yet. The original budget, the actual budget gets approved, and the tax levy gets certified at the end of October. Within that, we have what we're starting, and Dr. Means will speak more to this, but a TOSA 2075 task force that we're looking at developing, and they will help put their heads around some of these tougher discussions that we've mentioned and some of the blind spots that we have within our system and start to prioritize those things as we move forward.
So the TOSA 2075 task force will address a number of different issues. We'll start with open enrollment. We will also address our demographic study, looking out in the next 10 years to see what demographers are suggesting and predicting our student enrollment will look like in this community. We will then pivot and talk about transportation. What does transportation look like? And from there, we'll talk about what do we want our schools to look like, and what type of 21st century learning environments do we want to provide for the number of students that we're predicting that we should have in our school system. All of these different and very heavy conversations that we've pointed out to you this evening will be discussed through the TOSA 25 task force. The deadline for signing up for the task force is June 2nd, this Friday.
And the application is again through that code at the top, or through our district website. You can find that also. I think that is what we have.
That is the conclusion of our presentation, but I'm going to move this microphone into the aisle. If you have questions, I think Mr. Jamie Price is also conducting this meeting and officiating it over it virtually. So if there are questions, Mr. Brightman or I or others from our district leadership team will take your questions. So thank you for your attention.
Maybe Jamie online, get someone involved. You got one?
Yeah, we do have one.
We've got one, Jamie.
Cindy online. Okay, I'll wait.
I hope I'm tall enough. Anyways, why was it asked that the open enrollment be decreased this year?
I think that one of the major reasons why our administrative recommendation was to reduce the number of open enrollment students is because we believe that we need to do a hard reset on looking at what is our space capacity, how many seats do we have available for resident students in the district, do we have the right resources and support systems in place to ensure that when we do bring students from other communities into our district, that they're successful and is a positive learning experience. So all those different components of the open enrollment experience needs to be examined. And so instead of continuing to take students at the rate that we have, in the last 2 years, we have reduced the number of, this is now the second year. And I think it's very important for the community to hear this. because often I think that our administrative team is shouldered with the responsibility or what the community believes. We've welcomed a large number of open enrollment students. We've actually reduced the number of open enrollment students during my tenure. But as one board member has pointed out to me, the fact remains that nearly 1 in 7 students in Wauwatosa is an open enrollment student. And that's a fact that we'll have to continue to wrestle with. And I think that's the reason why we have decided that we're not pausing open enrollment, but we are slowing it down until we can have a community voice around what's the vision for our district moving forward.
I was glad to see that the line item for teacher salaries was increased. We've been hearing that our Wauwatosa teacher salaries have been significantly lower than many other communities. For the actual salary schedule for individual teachers, how much has that been increased? What percentage?
It's been increased by 6%. Looks like we need to address Fund 41 a little bit more, right?
That's control problem.
Well, appreciate your time tonight. What prompted my question was early on, you talked about meals provided to students during COVID, I think it was. And I was just wondering, generally speaking, does means testing or ability to pay in terms of benefits provided to students, does that enter into the equation at all in terms of budget impact, things like that? Or am I?
Very much, yeah. The normal world, non-pandemic world, is there's a free reduced calculation that's done on families to decide whether they qualify for free lunch on an income benchmark, and then reduced, and then fully paid. And so it's pretty low threshold. A lot of people think they're not set high enough. During COVID and additional funding, the federal government said everyone is free. So we're not going to be doing that. And so that was just for a year and a half period.
Right.
So now we'll return to the old system with that. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Price, we can take a question or questions from online.
Yeah, absolutely. So for online attendees, if you have a question, please use the raise hand feature within the Zoom client. We do have a question from Laura Ryan. Laura, you have the microphone.
Hi, I'm really glad that transportation is one of the things that you're trying to achieve. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of partnership that could be had with the city, since transportation would reduce a lot of infrastructure costs and repairs. And it just seems like maybe that could be a long-term savings for the city.
Yeah, we've had very early and informal discussion with my counterpart at the city and discussed what we're trying to accomplish. I think the city has some vision in that same arena. And so we'll continue those discussions, and we can be creative because we're starting with nothing, right? So we're looking at adding something to get students to school more safely and hopefully more habitually. So we'll look at all options and put everything on the table. Because again, we're starting from scratch with it.
I guess the other part to that question too would be when I went to West 20 plus years ago, there was a city bus dedicated to that area, which that's no longer there, correct?
Yes, we're researching whether it's dedicated. I don't
believe it's, there's still a route there, but I don't believe it's just school specific.
There are routes, but we don't believe they're dedicated just to space.
Stops, but it's not.
But at that time, like
At that time, it was dedicated.
well, no, I'm saying like it comes
relevant to school reading time,
Okay.
but I don't know how that's.
I don't know how that's evolved.
Negotiated, but the 66, it used to operate with the board.
Yeah, we'll look into that. And yes, Milwaukee County partnerships, other municipal partnerships, other programs, we'll definitely look at all options as we look at that.
Okay, thanks a lot.
So it looks like we have no more questions from our remote attendees.
We have one more question in the room or follow up?
Yeah, I just, thank you for saying Milwaukee County. It wasn't a city bus. The city doesn't provide buses. It's a Milwaukee County transit system, but I should point out that in response to the previous questions, we're all facing the same problem with the state. We're not getting the funding we need. Milwaukee County transit system is about to go out of business. And I mean out of business. Within 4 years, if there's not additional funding, all of the county's funds will be spent on mandated priorities from the state. There will be no money for parks and no money for the transit system. None. The state has to change that. Now, that's part of the discussion up there. In terms of the city providing services in partnership with the school district, we're always looking at that. But the problem with that is we're heading over the fiscal cliff along with the school district. We're begging for funding from the state. We are a AAA or AA1 rated district, city as well, and we're prudent and we're innovative, and the state doesn't give us enough money. My question, though, is you're talking about reducing open enrollment and resetting priorities. Now, I think that's appropriate, but does that portend the possibility of closing a school building?
No, we're just now getting, if you recall, if you tuned into the board meetings, we had a third party do a very in-depth and scientific enrollment study for us. And one of the takeaways that we're seeing is we're going to keep pace with our existing student base, whereas most urban, semi-urban districts are going to see sharp declines in enrollment. And so they see that because of the thriving community that we have, because of the mix of housing and the retail and the corporate and the everything that this community offers for its residents. And so we're going to bust that trend as far as the preliminary data that we've seen from that. So, so that'll be part of our research. But
I think Mr. Brightman answered that very well. Our open enrollment strategy for the last few years is not a preamble, if you will, to us looking to reduce our footprint or number of schools. Again, the TOSA 2075 task force will dive into this more deeply with that study, but the preliminary overview of it is that we're going to keep pace, that the city is doing a good job in making this a vibrant place to live. So contrary to other communities, we continue to be a very attractive place for young people to bring their school-age children here. So I think what we will have to do is to figure out how do we utilize our current facilities and make sure that they're 21st century ready for young people. As educators, we continue to use the term 21st century ready schools, and it's 2023. And so we're behind in that if we're still using the term 21st century learning environments and it's 2023, we're behind. We just need to catch up. And so great question. I think it's a very direct question, and I hope we're giving you a very direct answer that the preliminary data that we're seeing is very fruitful, is bright, and it is revealing that we're going to have to keep our footprint, but how do we utilize the footprint in a very effective way?
Sorry, this brought up a lot of questions, but one concern I have is that we've had some problems in the high schools, and one of your things that you were saying is important to us is that the psychological component to a student is for their safety, and I don't think we have that right now. And that is the most important thing, that each school, in my opinion, should be its own community and be able to handle all of the disruptive behavior or whatever. And I'm not sure, because I'm hearing lots of different things from different people, that we're not enabling our teachers and our administrators of those schools to do what they need to do to keep the schools safe. Right from the beginning, no kid's gonna be feeling safe or want to learn or anything else. Mental health out the wing, right? Well, you've got to keep all of those schools safe. And it just doesn't seem like that's been happening. And I know you want to increase the budget and yada, 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 and how many people, but even the people you have right now, are they being given the time and the energy and the appreciation for handling any kind of behavior that happens in a classroom or in their community, in their schools?
In terms of appreciation, I've heard from colleagues from all across the state who are double checking and they want to make sure that it's not a print error when they see that Wauwatosa has provided a 12% compensation increase to their educators. So what we've been saying is that words are cheap, but actions mean something, and that we've shown our appreciation through that perspective. But as we shared through this presentation, we've also have done things such as lowering class sizes and creating common planning time for teachers. So we know it's just not money. And so we've done a lot of other things that way. I think you're right. I think safety is important. Students and staff have to feel psychologically and physically safe. I know that maybe that the start of your question may have been associated, or maybe this is how I interpreted it, was associated somewhat with open enrollment and how safety comes into play with open enrollment. What I would just share with the community, because I don't know if we're explicit enough, we do not take open enrollment students at the secondary level. We take students through open enrollment at the elementary level only. We haven't taken students at the secondary level, that means the middle school or high school level, that are open enrollment students for years. And so if there are students who are misbehaving, who are having challenging times, who are also open enrollment students, who are middle school or high school students, that means they've been in our system for a while. They've been with us. And so we do believe that that it's important to support all of our students. And one thing that we deeply believe in, that my values are aligned with, is that once those students then become a student and they say, yes, I want to go to the Wauwatosa School District, they are a Wauwatosa School District resident, regardless of their zip code. And so I think that's another piece of our language that we just have to, I know we internally, we have to continue to work on. With that being said, I think it's really critical that the community knows that we've had more disciplinary hearings than in the past. This school year, we've had more expulsion hearings than we've had in the past. We have addressed discipline and have addressed it, I believe, in a very direct way. But we know that we can't only use that one tool of discipline. That we also have to use social emotional learning tools. We have to use social workers and counselors, and we have to make sure that we're providing professional learning in a way that equips teachers to deal with the complexity of what students bring to the table today. I'm in classrooms often. Our team is in classrooms often. Our team, we've been teachers, we've been school psychologists. I think we all, at times, when we are meeting as a leadership team, will say, that's a little different than when we were in the field. And so we acknowledge it, and we know that it's a little different now. And that's why we believe that all these different supports are critical to our success moving forward. And then I guess the last thing, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. The conversation that we're having about the uniqueness and the complexity of children in Wauwatosa is the same conversation that they're having about children and the complexity of children in Brown County, that they're having in Manitowoc, that they're having, you name the rural area of the state, they're having the same conversation. It may look a little different, the behaviors may come off and be demonstrated a little bit differently, but everyone in this state, regardless if it's an urban school district, a suburban district like us, or a rural district, are facing these challenges.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. This certainly isn't elementary, but I think you do a good job with breaking this down. And I have been to every presentation that Keith has done or you mentioned earlier. One thing that I wanted to find out a little bit more, I think somebody I heard talked about partnerships with the city, and maybe the mayor can speak with this a little bit more, but I know the city just did a population survey, it's something like that. And I know our school board authorized spending to have some kind of study. So I'm wondering if instead of the city and the school district both doing this, if there can be some kind of partnership to look at that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was just transparency with the district finances. I'm wondering if we could put more online for the public to see. And I'm going to cite what you can find in board docs for the Elmbrook School District. So they have, every month, they have their financial report on a spreadsheet, and they list item by item what is being spent, but they also list which fund it's coming under. You know, it's Fund 27, it's Fund 41. So could we do something like that so that it's very transparent to the community and you can see that? And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up too is that in that monthly financial report that goes to the board, not the one that was done this month, but last month, it's cut off. So for example, it says, it's the things over 20,000, I think is what that report is. It says how much money we spent to the school district of, and then it's cut off. So there's not enough space to be able to share that. So I'm wondering, in the effort to do transparency with the public, if we can look at what Elmbrook does or look at other districts and what's out there for people to be able to see. And that way it's right out there. So we all know how things are being spent, which funds it's coming from, etc. So thank you for considering that and doing something like that.
Yeah, as you said, the most recent financial report, there was some kind of a glitch with that one, and I'm not sure why we corrected that, so I'm happy to with that piece. And there's kind of a balance between, we want to be as transparent as we can, but we also know that we run into issues or potential problems by being overly transparent with things like check numbers, not check numbers, but vendors explicitly, a lot of cyber type security, things that we take very seriously, and we want to kind of match that with that. So we'll process through that. I'll take a look and see what Elmbrook does and see how we can replicate something like that. But I just want to be hesitant to commit to something before we understand the cyber risk of putting more out there versus less. So want to balance that.
I'll take the first part of your question. I'm really proud of the working relationship and the cooperation that we have with the city. Well, Tulsa, I think that the timing of their visioning process and our Tulsa 2075 creates opportunities for us to have deeper collaboration. I think that there's great opportunity for us to have that level of cooperation and collaboration this fall as the Tulsa 25 task force gets underway. They'll start in June. So I think this fall we'll have more that we can actually share with our city colleagues and collaborate around more. But I think the timing is actually, we didn't plan it this way. I know that Jim Archambault and the mayor and I didn't sit together and say, let's plan to do all this visioning together at the same time. It just came together this way. But I'm excited. I'm excited for our community that we can collaborate, and I'm also excited that unlike other communities, we have a really good working relationship and open communication. And I'm really positive and confident that we'll find some opportunities to do some crossover collaboration.
Yeah, if I can address that too. We are required by state law to do a comprehensive plan, and our comprehensive plan was last done in 2008. It's well overdue right now. We've committed to starting our comprehensive planning process in June. So yes, I mean, we didn't sit down, we are gonna have lunch on Friday actually, but we didn't sit down and say, oh, let's both do vision plans, but we're doing vision plans and they're gonna pretty much follow the same path. So what we've been asked to do by one of the alders anyway, and we've done this before, is to have a joint session or sessions with the school board and the common council. And those are the sorts of things that we'll be addressing. Previously, we did an open space plan about 8 years ago, where we sat down and said, you've got playgrounds, we've got parks. We need soccer. Do we need more soccer? Do we need less baseball? We figured out our space needs and we worked together on that. So that's the sort of thing that we've done in the past and we will continue to do. So yes, we have a very good relationship between the city and the schools, and that's something we'll always work on, because one thing we always try to remember is it's exactly the same taxpayers that pay for the schools as pay for everything that we do at the city.
That's unique, that the city boundaries are exactly the school district boundaries, so that helps.
My question is about the 700,000 for the creative community planning time, because we already have the early release Wednesdays, so I thought that was supposed to be the planning time. Maybe some schools aren't using it and some schools are. But what's that 700,000 going towards? How is that being spent for common community time or planning time?
Great question. I think it's a triple win, if you will. So children will profit from that additional investment, because that means there's more art, music, and physical education instruction happening. So when the children are going to art, music, and physical education, which is good, I think that's a staple of this community. The teachers will have common time to plan together. What we call they used to be formerly known as Early Release Wednesdays. We call it PACE Wednesday now. PACE Wednesday stands for Prepare, Align, Collaborate, and Engage. So we call it PACE, that's our acronym. And PACE Wednesdays are utilized for a lot of different things. For professional learning, it's utilized to analyze student work and figure out what do we need to do and how do we need to respond as the adults who provide service to those children. How will our instruction look differently based on the assessments and the performance of the students? When I was a teacher, I remember once I walked into my mentor's classroom and I said, the students didn't do well on my tests. And my mentor looked at me and said, is it that the students didn't do well on your test or you didn't teach it well? And that was hard for me to hear. That was really, as a young teacher, that was really difficult to hear. And then he sat down with me and he said, let's take a look at your assessments and see where the students didn't perform well, because now that's your roadmap to go back and reteach it. It's not enough for you to say they didn't do well, let's move on to the next unit. Let's really look at it. I was a social studies teacher. I taught US history. And so if I taught the Civil War, and I saw that in all of the questions that the students were really missing the the economic side of the Civil War, I would really do a poor job in not going back to those concepts when I teach the Industrial Revolution, because I've missed that theme. And so I have to really make sure that they understand it the next time around. That's what's happening on PACE Wednesdays, which is very different than Common Planning Time, where we're looking at what do we want to teach and what are the activities that we're going to use. So that's the big difference between PACE Wednesdays and Common Planning Time. Dr. Marble, did I explain that as you're giving me the look of maybe not? That's it's as basic as I can provide it to you.
So like planning ahead rather than reviewing what's been happening.
We want to make sure that the pace Wednesdays are preserved for for professional learning, for analyzing student work, and looking at how we can reteach and better serve students. The common planning time for our elementary school teachers is just looking at, so what are we going to teach next week, and how will we make sure that the instruction that's happening in teachers A classroom is going to be the same instruction that happens in classroom B and C as well.
That's a clarifying question. We didn't answer with yours. Sure, that is maybe for me, as I'm now, not in the educational sphere, I'm building on that sorry, as I try to piece together, why does it cost money to give teachers common planning time? As we're in a budget meeting, so.
The reason why it costs money is because we have to hire art, music, and physical education teachers to then create that time in the schedule so then they can have the time. So that's the budget part of it. Was that what you were asking? Was that the question? Yes.
So you did one, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So if I can just add on a little bit more to that. So thank you both, Rita and Betsy, for those questions. Really appreciate that. What has, as a former elementary principal, what has driven the schedule that the building principals put together is when they have those specialist teachers in their building, because to date, our specialist teachers have been split between buildings. And so I would have to work with my other elementary colleagues to find out when, say, my art teacher would be available versus the art teacher going over to the Montessori school, because that was the sharing there. And so what would happen is, because the principal at the Montessori school was then working with another principal around when the music teacher was available. And so it was a domino effect that then was starting to impact when the reading blocks work, when math blocks work. And so that should be the driving force. If we're teaching reading, writing, math, science, social studies, those should be the big rocks that we put into a schedule to then say, we'll fit in art and music and Spanish and physical education around the academic time. And then we can also protect the time with the specials, so art, music, ed. And we can be really strategic about where that goes now, with more flexibility of having, not having to share as much, and being able to say now teachers have 300 minutes of protected time in addition to the work that they do on the early release. So when we talk about really good instruction taking place, it all starts with planning. If we don't have time to properly plan, then the quality of the instruction cannot be what we need it to be. So planning is paramount.
Jamie, are there any other questions online?
No, we don't have anybody with their hands raised.
It's currently 7:40. Our leadership team will stay here to answer any other questions you may have. I just want to thank you all for being here. This has been recorded by Mr. Jamie Price in the cloud, and we will post this along with all other materials. The depth of questions that you presented this evening demonstrates to us that this type of community engagement is really important. I recall when we started planning this, and some people said, why are we doing this again? We just simply have the meeting in June, and then we have the second meeting in June, and that's it. And we hope that as community leaders, as informed community partners, that you are now better informed and have more knowledge around our budget, where the funds are located. But that's not the end of this conversation. If you have additional questions, Mr. Brightman and I take emails. We will take meetings with you in person. We'll take phone calls. It's our goal that the community is well informed of what this budget looks like prior to June 12th. And so when we present to the school board on June 12th, and again, I want to thank our partners at the city for being here. There was a lot of conversation and that came up, and again, we're proud of the partnership there. But I'm also thankful for our 2 school board members who made time to be here as well. We're really excited about what this budget holds for us, but we're even more excited about what the future can hold. And we appreciate you being here and giving us feedback. Thank you.